Hello, here we are in the gorgeous Alabeo Cessna172RG, the Cutlass. And we are going to be doing a bit of circuit practice here in High River because that is what I've actually been doing in the real airplane as of lately with an instructor, obviously. But that's what we're going to do. The reason why I have this aircraft mostly is because the aircraft that I'm actually training on at this airport is a 172N, and it has a very similar panel layout to this one, and for the sake of systems familiarity more than anything, I have been flying this a little bit as of late. Obviously, it's not quite as in-depth as the A2A aircraft in terms of its engine management and persistent wear and things like that, but it's not so bad nonetheless. But we are going to assume the pre-flight inspection is complete, and we will ensure that seat belts and shoulder harnesses are adjusted and locked. We will assume that to be the case because there's not much we can do about it. And that the fuel valve is indeed on both, and that the avionics power switch and everything else is off, and that the circuit breakers are in, and the brakes, we'll just set the parking brake, although we don't seem to do that too much in the actual aircraft. Not sure why, it's basically the same brake, but... So for starting, we're just gonna jump right into it. The mixture will be rich, propeller needs to be on high RPM, carburetor heat needs to be cold. Sorry, I can't speak too well today. Throttle, we pump it once or twice and leave it open about 1/4 of an inch. It is reasonably similar to the regular 172, it just has a, I need to stop clucking my tongue. It has a constant speed propeller. Propeller area needs to be clear, so we will open the window and shout "Clear!" as per usual. And master needs to go on. Ignition, we can start. And here goes nothing. And she roars to life. Alright, we are good to go. Let's see, oil pressure is up, and the beacon is on. That's the only light we really need at this time. Avionics are on, and we'll just set the radios. I'm not going to be using the ATC system, but the frequency for... Well, I won't be using the ATC system in FSX. I'll be trying to point out what messages would be sent when. So it's 123.00 is the area traffic, and we'll monitor 1215, which is the emergency frequency, to make sure if there is an aircraft in distress we hear it. We'll turn the transponder on to standby, and just for yucks, we are going to set the... Oh, this is a little weird in the Alabeo aircraft how you do this, but we're going to... I was going to try and set the... Oh, there we are. Yeah, the Alabeos are a little weird for this, but we're going to set the... the ADF to 299er, which is the Turner Valley NDB, which isn't too far from here. And it should pick it up, theoretically. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, it's over there. Unless it's not actually pointing to anything. Okay. So that's our radio set. We will be taxiing to a position for a run-up. Ideally, you want to be angled into the wind, but the wind is nil, so we are going to just do it here. So we'll run the engine up to 1800 RPM. And... okay. Cabin doors closed and locked, flight controls free and correct. Flight instrument set, fuel selector valve is on both. Mixture is rich. Although we're above 3,000 feet, we could lean it, but I'm not going to. Auxiliary fuel pump should be on. This has a fuel pump. The actual, well, the 172N doesn't. Alright, so time for our mag check. Left. Back to both. Right. Back to both, and we'll cycle the propeller from high to low RPM and then back. We'll only do that once. And we will engage carburetor heat and check for RPM drop. And we'll just leave that on for now. In the previous video when we went to Banff, I left it on for the whole flight, and that was a horrible thing to do, and it's probably a good thing we didn't have an engine failure because of that. But we will bring the throttle, actually we'll check suction, it's in the green, bring the throttle back to idle, and once the engine bottoms out with carb heat, we should be good to go. And it looks okay, we'll bring it back up to 1000 RPM. And that's just all good. Radios, we already set them. We're actually going to do the rest of this the hold point. So, we would get on the radio and say, High River traffic, what's the tail number? Golf Alpha Lima is taxiing to runway 07. Just for the sake of authenticity. And here we go. Except with the ORBX scenery, it's runway 06. The real one is 07, so I'll just be saying 07. I'll be living under the pragmatic assumption that the runway has not been labeled correctly, because it hasn't. Now, I found in the real airplane that 1000 RPM is usually a decent speed for taxi, but in the sim it takes a little more because you have the ground friction bug. At least in some aircraft they've overcome it, but I don't think this is one of them. So we'll just hold it at 1000 RPM and ensure that the radios are set once again. Indeed they are. We will be turning the transponder to ALT. Autopilot is off. We don't have one. Strobe lights, we won't be needing them. Throttle friction lock, we can't adjust it. It's a simulator. And we should be good for takeoff. So one thing we will do is angle the aircraft to the left so that we can, at least in theory, see any conflicting traffic. I don't have any AI traffic running, so we don't really actually need to worry about it, but we'll just have a look anyway. Without track IR, it's just easier to do this from the outside. Alright, we will taxi onto the runway, and we would get on the radio and say, High River traffic, Golf Alpha Lima is lining up runway 07, or something to that effect. You would probably use the full call sign, well, at least everything but the C, so it would be, you know what, never mind, Golf Alpha Lima. So, now that we're in position, we would just make sure everything's good, the carb heat's not on, fuel selector's on both, everything looks okay, and we would proceed. And you get on the radio and say, High River traffic, this is Golf Alpha Lima taking off runway 07. And if we were really paranoid, we might say, High River traffic, this is Golf Alpha Lima rolling runway 07. And airspeed's alive, looking for 55 knots. There it is, rotate, and maintain runway heading with the rudder. Now we're climbing, gear up. We wouldn't do this in a 172N because it doesn't have retractable landing gear, but this does. And the way that Cessnas with retractable landing gear, the way it folds up is really weird to see. I'll show it to you on the next takeoff because we're going to do a couple touch and goes here. But we want to hold about 70 knots in the climb. That'll give us actually a pretty good rate. This is a little more nippy than a 172N, so we'll get up to that altitude faster. We'll start the turn at about 3,900 feet, which comes out to about 500 feet AGL. And we'll be laughing. I'm going to turn that fuel pump off because it's being annoying, and I feel like it's a checklist item that I probably missed. Alright, there it is. We'll start our turn. Interesting thing about the weather, I'm using real world weather and we'll be looking to the north, although you probably can't see it, to the north in Calgary, where I'm actually sitting right now as I record this. I'm not in High River. We've had a few funnel clouds this afternoon, but they have since passed. And the wind here, as you saw on the windsock, is, well, there's really none to speak of. So we're okay. Turn on to downwind once you're past this marsh. Typically I'll start the turn once we're running perpendicular to this. And that's more or less it. And we'll have to level off in the turn. Level off at about 4,500 feet, which is our circuit height. Let the speed recover. And then bring the power back. And there we go. We're into more of a cruise setting for the downwind. And once we are established in a straight line, we'll do the downwind check. Ooh. Turn a little too far, that's okay. So typically the downwind check, we need to make sure that master is on, ignition is on both, carb heat is on, mixture is rich, and fuel selector is on both. And then we're just waiting until the field is about 45 degrees behind us on the left. And we're losing a little bit of altitude, but nothing to squeal about. I will actually lean the mixture a little bit, just because we're operating at fairly high altitudes here, but yeah, we'll go down, do a touch and go, and then probably do another circuit and come back and land, and I think we'll be okay. In most of the circuit practice I've been doing in the real aircraft, we've been backtracking to take off again, but we'll just do a touch and go here. And we're getting pretty close to 45 degrees, so we'll get ready to turn on to base. We bring the power back, and we wait for the airspeed to get into the wide arc. There it is. We'll add 20 degrees of flaps, put the landing gear down, and in just a second we will start our turn on to base. We're looking to maintain about 65 knots, basically throughout the base and final, and that should be good. We're aiming for about 500 feet AGL when we turn on to final. I haven't been keeping up with my stuff we've been saying on the radio. Perhaps now I would say, high river traffic, this is Golf Alpha Lima, turning base for runway 07, touch and go, for the sake of authenticity. Airspeed's a little high. I'm not going to worry about it, because we actually need to level off because we're a little low for where we should be on the approach, and we'll just try to maintain about 65 knots. We're technically in slow flight now, so we'd best be on our toes. And we're just looking for the runway. There's a house down here, and typically it's a good reference point for the turn. This is one thing that makes it really convenient to have really detailed scenery of your, well, I'm not sure if I'd call it a local airport. It's 40 kilometers away from where I live, but close enough to local. Oh, took the turn a little sharp, so we'll just straighten out. And the thing we need to remember is the moment we touch down, we need to bring the flaps up and turn the carb heat off. And let's just keep it on that runway center line. And we're going to flare when we get to be just about over the numbers, so far we're okay. Okay, we're down to about 100 feet. Coming down through 50. That's assuming I set the altimeter correctly, because I didn't set it, but here we go. And touchdown. Alright, flaps up, carb heat off, and full power, let's go. And we're off again. Gear up. And we're airborne again, so we would say, high river traffic, this is Golf Alpha Lima, airborne, runway 07. And speed's a little high on the climb out, so we'll just climb a little more steeply. Get it back down to 70 knots. With their retractable landing gear, it gets rid of some drag, so get a little more speed out of it. I guess that's the point of buying an airplane with retractable landing gear. At the time the 172RG came out, it was about $20,000 more expensive than the base one, so I guess you get what you pay for, I don't know. I've seen a fair few retractable geared aircraft in High River. There are at least 2 or 3 people who own Cessna Centurions there, which is a, well, Cessna 210, I believe. It's a 6-seater with retractable landing gear, and it seems rather lovely. It's like the 206, but a bit less minivan-ish, I guess. Other than that, oh, we're ready to turn on to downwind now. And there's the town. Typically, we're running downwind about halfway between the airport and the town. Speaking of which, we would now say high river traffic, Golf Alpha Lima is on downwind, runway 07. Or full stop, I guess. because this will be our final landing. I'm just going to keep this relatively short. But, let me know if you'd like to see this aircraft in the future, because I've been flying it quite a lot because it's a relevant thing to do. Oop. Speed's getting way up, okay. Let's run the downwind check. Master is on, ignition's on both, carpet is on, mixture is rich, and fuel selector is on both. The reason why I'm not flying the A2A Cessna172 for this, I guess, is, like I said, this is carbureted. The panel layout's very similar. For the sake of familiarity with the systems, it's a little better. Albeit it doesn't handle the same, obviously. It has a different engine, retractable landing gear. But it's close enough to be worthwhile. And I kind of like Alabeo's aircraft. They're not very graphically demanding, they're not very expensive, and they fly pretty well. They at least approximate the real thing. That's the thing, unless you have a really good yoke, muscle memory doesn't really translate into the simulator too well. And I kind of naffed the base leg a little bit, but we're in the white arc, so we'll bring the flaps down to 20. I was too busy gabbing, I missed the turn. Oh well. We'll just have a slightly longer final. I'm not gonna panic about that. Or I could cut the base a little bit, but I'm not gonna do that. What I mean by that is I could turn about maybe 30 degrees to the left, but I'm okay having a longer final. I can deal with that. We're gonna trim it. Because in the real aircraft, you really need to trim it, because otherwise the controls are gonna be really heavy. And trim works kind of fundamentally differently in a way that you can't really simulate in a simulator without force feedback, I guess, but that's okay. Oops. Oh no. Gear down. That's why we're going so fast. I am not interested in pancaking today. Oh well. Let's start the turn. We'll make it wide because there's still a ways to go, but other than that, we should be okay. One thing I've noticed this aircraft does on landing is when you apply the brakes, the nose really dips. I don't know if the real 172RG is inclined to do that. If anyone has any experience with one, feel free to let me know. In my experience, the 172N doesn't really do that. But who knows? Again, we're still a little fast, but I am okay with that. Let's have a look. Another reason I like this aircraft, it comes with a default paint scheme with a Canadian registration. For some reason, it really bothers me in the simulator to fly an aircraft that isn't registered for the country you're flying it in. For some reason, that bothers me. And I recently acquired a repaint for the A2A Comanche that's a Canadian registered, but we should be focusing right now on the flare. Don't need all this power. Bring it back, hold it, hold it, hold it, hold it, and we're down. And apply brakes, well, minimum necessary. And I didn't really bother with my radio gab on that one because I was busy gabbing about other things. But I would now say that higher traffic, this is Golf Alpha Lima, backtracking runway 07. And we would just turn around. Convenient thing, if you use the differential brakes, this can turn on a dime, just like the real one. And because, I don't know, this seems like it has more effective nose wheel steering. I don't know if that's from it not being accurate, or just from it being the retractable landing gear version, and it's a little better, but real 172 requires a fair bit of differential braking, and at least the A2A 172 is faithful to that. I know Coronado has a 172N, and I actually have it, but it's a little old, and its flight dynamics aren't great. It's a little antiquated. But that's neither here nor there. We are down. And in just a few moments, once we actually are clear, we would say higher over traffic, Golf Alpha. Have I been getting this right? Yes. Golf Alpha Lima is clear of the active. I didn't bring the flaps up or turn the carpet off. I am wretched. Oh well. we can do that now. It's not a desperate thing, you won't die if you don't do it, but you might inject crap into the engine. Alright, so after landing, yeah, flaps up, carburetor heat, cold, cowl flaps. I've just left them open the whole time, not really made any difference. That's the other thing this has that the normal 172 doesn't. It's cowl flaps. It, in terms of its cockpit, it's a lot like a 182 in that regard, in that you have a prop control and cowl flaps. Which is a little strange when the throttle doesn't directly dictate what the RPM is going to be, because you kinda get used to that, but no matter. I'm actually going to park directly in front of the office here, which normally only the school's airplanes do, but that's what I normally fly when I'm here, obviously. And also the hangar them in here. This is actually a pretty big hangar. There's 4 or 5 airplanes in here at any given time, including one of the Turbo Centurions, but that's neither here nor there. Harbor Regional Airport. The other side of this sign says propellers can kill, as indeed they can. So we are parked here. I've got my checklist. Parking brake is set. Throttles at 1000 RPM. Avionics off. Mixture. Idle cutoff. And close the throttle as RPM drops. And then ignition off. Master off. And if it were the last flight of the day, we would lock the controls. But I'm not going to do that right now. So here we are. We did a couple of circuits. The wind was lovely. I should have booked lessons for today, but it was supposed to be stormy, and it was until very recently. So I think that is nearly about all. The latest Stalker video just went up, actually, if you're interested in that, but I will stop promoting, and I will just say that I have been Mr. 660 flying the Alabeo Cessna172RG Cutlass 2. Toodaloo. Propeller.